And this person was born into the name of Matthew. And then when I came to the church about 12 years ago, I knew her as Abby. And when we said goodbye to her for the last time, she was known as Billy. And so these words are from Billy Sage. She wrote these at the end of our Building Your Own Theology. Everybody was invited to write a little bit about what they believe about the world and the universe. And she shared this with the Building Your Own Theology group on the last night, and then it was about 2 days later that she had her stroke, and we had to say goodbye. So these are the last words that Billy Sage, as far as I know, wrote, and we were honored to have them be written here. What difference, religion, God or no God, if you live love? If you live love and evolve a higher consciousness, the universe wins, and when you die, you return to all that is as fully love. If this is not the case, and you live love and return to free energy and elements when you die, then the universe wins, as all that is receives particles of love. If you believe in God and live love, the universe wins as you return it to your God as love when you die. Live love and let the universe and all that is win.
This community of care is created through our work and time together, our commitment to one another. This is our covenant to walk together in loving fellowship, to share our hopes and values. As we pass these baskets, we thank you for your generous gifts, which support the work of this religious community and Unitarian in the world at large. As a reflection of our values, we are pleased to participate in the Change for Change program. So the loose change you put in will go to a local nonprofit in the Grand Valley. And with gratitude, we now will receive today's offering. This congregation our energy and resources. Its wealth is what we share as we contribute to its life. We receive our lives within it. All right, please stand and sing in the great hymnal, number 123, Spirit of Life.
Oh
So I was, is this echoing? Is it okay for everybody? Okay. Um, Danny and I were having lunch together the other day, and actually yesterday, and we were just talking about the world, and she was talking about how, she's like, you were alive for Columbine, and you were alive for 9/11, and you've like lived through so much stuff, and I was like, yeah, but when you get older and if you have kids or grandkids, you're going to be the ones, they're going to be looking at you saying, you were alive through COVID, and you were alive through the Trump years, and you were alive through all of this stuff that they're going to look back at and be looking at, like, how did you handle that, and what did you do? And I was just thinking about, there are always times, we're always creating history. But I do think that this period in time, in the United States of America, in the world, we are living through historic times. We are living through this technology evolution where we have these phones and we have these computers, and I'm talking to people who are miles away right now. At the same time, I'm talking to all of you. And now we have something that I've been scared to even deal with. I don't even know what AI is going to do for us as a culture, as a humanity. But these are historic times. And I remember looking through back in history and being like, well, what would it have been like if I had lived in the Roman Empire, or if I had lived in the time of Jesus, or if I had lived during slavery or during World War II? Well, we are living through right now some of those times that future generations are going to be like, wow, wow. There are, I think most of us in this room, I think I can safely say, that almost all of us grew up without technology or even computers. I made it all through high school and my first year of college without a computer. I had a little word processor, and that was cool. And now we have the internet, and we have these, it's just amazing. It's amazing. And even in the last 2 weeks since I was giving a sermon, I was here with you last week, but we were celebrating who we are as a congregation. Just in the last 2 weeks, we had, I think, about 30 million people in the United States come together to say, we don't want a king in this country. And we had 3,500 people here in Grand Junction that showed up for that rally. And Danny had left her car at Canyon View Park. And so an hour later, she couldn't get out. So we went and got lunch, came back, and I dropped her off for her car. There had been 3,500 people there. When I dropped her off, the park was cleared out. There was not one piece of trash. There was no litter. There were no signs. It was like Canyon View always looks, because we as humans, as people, we can come together and we can stand and say, this is who we are and what we stand for, with love and laughter and compassion, and standing in our power, and then we can leave without leaving a mess. And my guess is that, I know that there were protests in all 50 states. Like, you can't have 30 million people show up. But my guess is that the experience we had at Canyon View is the experience that most of those protests were. That people came, they had their signs, they expressed their views, and they went home. It was joyful and it was inspiring. And so that is one of the realities that we have today is that we have amazing people who are doing the work to come together to say, who are we? What do we stand for? And 2 days before that, we had heard news that there were some ICE raids going on in Grand Junction along 29.5 Road and 30 Road. And so it was requested of me that I maybe put together a spontaneous action so that we could show some support to our immigrant community. And so in the course of about 12 hours, while we were balancing, okay, how do we get the word out quietly but not publicly, because we want to surround this immigrant community with love and prayer and song, but we don't want to endanger them. We were able to get about 80 people to show up and surround this building, singing and holding hands and just saying, you are seen. So that happened. And then at the same time, we had Supreme Court rulings that did not come down our way at all, and they allowed a state to disavow or ban gender-affirming care for minors, so that happened. And then last night, the United States bombed Iran, so that happened. And so I've been thinking all day, who am I in the midst of all of this? Who are we? That's been the question I've been saying over and over again. But what do I want to stand up here and say? What do I want to share? I know that there are people who say, I can't do politics anymore. I need something inspiring. And so I try to find that balance. But what I was thinking about yesterday, about who I want to be, and this was before we had the news about Iran, just in relation to everything that's going on, the good and the bad, what I wrote for myself is, I'm to the point now that when something is on the news, that whether it's good or it's bad, I realized at this point, I am not outraged. I am not surprised, but I do choose to be aware. And through that awareness, I can act. And I am in control of my emotions, and I am not being manipulated by propaganda or fear. And so when I sometimes see the headlines and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to feel. Maybe that's what we can all do. I'm going to share that again because maybe what I found helpful for me will be helpful for all of you, okay? I am not outraged. We can be manipulated with the anger and the outrage, and outrageous things are happening, but that does not mean they get to control our individual emotions. I'm not surprised. I am not surprised by anything anymore. We've been talking about this since November. Nothing that has happened has been a surprise to me. Probably nothing that has happened has been a surprise to many of you. I am aware. And what I mean by that is, I don't think it's helpful to stick our head in the mud and just say, I'm turning it all off, I'm not going to engage, but it's also not helpful to be so sucked in that you can't do any self-care. So that's why I say I am aware. I do know what's going on. I am paying attention. And through that awareness, I can act. Because I am aware, I can then choose to act in the capacity that I need to act in, and I can choose that action because I am not being manipulated by emotions, because I am not outraged. I am aware, and I am in control of my emotions, and therefore I am not being manipulated by propaganda or fear. I think maybe that's how we navigate the world that we're in right now. Because there are some things that we have control over, and there are a lot of things that we don't have control over. There's that phrase, the circle of influence and the circle of concern. And what that means is if you have two concentric circles, there may be a whole lot in our circle of concern, right? We care about the environment. We care about our immigrant neighbors. We care about the people in Iran, in Ukraine, and Afghanistan. There's a whole lot we care about. That's our circle of concern. But then we also have to acknowledge that we have this circle of influence. And the circle of influence usually is much smaller than that circle of concern. But where our power lies is standing strong and firm in that circle of influence. And when we are strong and firm in our circle of influence, what happens is that that circle of influence can grow. So our circle of influence grows into the circle of concern. But it is very, very rare, if not completely impossible, for our circle of influence to ever extend all the way out into our circle of concern. And so that's what we have to do individually, is maybe take a little bit of time and think, okay, where is my circle of concern? And it right now might be really, really, really big, because there's so many things. But don't get scared. Don't get hopeless. Then you just take that next step and say, okay, where's my circle of influence? And then we act from that circle of influence. And individually, we may have a circle of influence that is so big, but then collectively it can get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Until all of the people whose own little individual circles of influence showed up together a few weeks ago and became this huge circle of influence that did almost expand into that circle of concern. And then it gets smaller again, right? Because we're not coming together as 30 million people all together every day. But part of that was to remind ourselves that we are not alone. And it can really, really feel like that, especially when there is this, what appears to be a discrepancy between people who have power, like our circle of influence, and who has the power right now. And it can feel really overwhelming and powerless, because individually, each one of us, we don't have the power to declare war. We don't have the power to stop any airplanes. We don't even have the power to turn any airplanes back. So that can feel really hopeless. But we do have the power to stay in charge of our own emotions. We have the power to be aware of what is going on in our own lives. We have the power to act in our own circle of influence. And then we might, because I always am very surprised at how much that circle of influence expands when we are standing in our own power. And so I want us to think about that today. What is your circle of influence? What is your circle of concern? And if some of your circle of concern is what is happening with these ICE raids, then reach out to Deb Cahill and become a confirmer. Learn about how ice works. Learn about what we can do in our valley. Your little circle of influence can show up for that. And so the other analogy that I shared, I think I shared it, if not, I shared it in my head to people, but I don't always remember what I stand up here and say. But I saw something about how when a choir together with collective voices is holding a really long note, and those of us who are just listening hear this beautiful note that just goes on and on and on and on and on with this choir, and we're thinking to ourselves, how are they doing that? Where is all of their breath coming from? Well, what's happening is that everybody is not holding the note at the same time. There are people that are holding the note while other people take their breath and catch their breath, and then they go back into the note while the people that were holding for them then catch their breath and take their breath. And that is how it appears that the choir is holding this continuous note. But no one person is holding their breath for that long because it's not possible. And so I think with the state of the world that we're in right now, I love that analogy because we have been holding a pretty high note, I think, since November, right? And we are going to be asked to continue to hold that high note, I think, for a long time. Maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years. 30 million people together can hold that note. Any one of us individually cannot hold our breath for 4 years. And so my invitation for us is to pay attention to that. And when you are stepping in, you're part of the choir, you're holding your note, and then you need to take a step back, catch your breath for however long it takes you to catch your breath again, knowing that other people will be holding that note. And then you can step back in and join. And then other people will step back, they will catch their breath. But the octave still is high. And it's strong, and it's collective. And so I just want us to think about that. And so what I did this week was I took a step back, and I kind of tried to catch my breath. And I wasn't here this week because I was taking Danny to her college orientation in Fort Collins, and so I got to just relax. We stayed with my brother and sister-in-law, who had to work, and they were feeling a little bit bad. They were saying, you know, we have to work, so there's not a whole lot we can do. And I was like, no, it's perfect. I was like, I have this book that Richard gave me from Yogananda translating the New Testament of the Bible, and I'm going to spend 3 hours learning about the metaphysical, esoteric understanding of the baptism of John the Baptist. And my brother and both of my sister-in-law were like, okay. And I'm like, I have my highlighters and I have my pens. And I spent all day Thursday and all day Friday with that book, just trying to understand these higher metaphysical principles. And my sister-in-law, because we're friends, she's like, that's great, but that sounds really boring. And I was like, no, it's fantastic for me because it's where because I understand it and I'm fascinated by it. And it's when I started the conversation today, in order for me to catch my breath, I need to be able to look to people and inspiration and wisdom that is smarter than me, that is wiser than me, that has a larger perspective than me, so that I can say, okay, I'm not all alone. We're not carrying the world, the weight of the world, all alone on our shoulders. There are people, there are wise avatars and spiritual masters who have been here before and will come again. And we don't have to do it all alone, but they've left us trails, they've left us clues, they've left us nuggets in how to understand the world around us. And so Yogananda, this is going to take me forever because this anthology that Richard gave me, it's 2 books just on the New Testament that are both like that big. And then Yogananda did the same thing with the Bhagavad Gita, like 2 commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. So I'm just systemically going through it because it's fascinating to me. But in the introduction, what Yogananda says, he says, in the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, which is kind of the spiritual text for the people in India for Hinduism, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I incarnate as an avatar. In visible form, I appear from age to age to protect the virtuous and to destroy evil doing in order to reestablish righteousness. So now keep in mind, Yogananda was writing almost 100 years ago, okay? So that's kind of older language, but what that says and where that brings hope for me, and now we're looking at this kind of from a more macrocosmic perspective. Basically, the Gita was written years and years, centuries before Buddha came, and Buddha was here 500 years before Jesus, right? So this wisdom goes way back to ancient humanity. But the principle of that was there are always going to be wise spiritual masters that are here, that are coming in, that are offering wisdom, that are offering guidance, that are connected with this consciousness of love. And they, in their soul journeys, have established that within themselves, they've figured it out, and then they come back to earth to be those examples and those role models. And I know that if it requires kind of a broader understanding that we are more maybe than just these physical bodies, right? If we think that all we are is this physical body and these 5 senses, what I'm saying isn't going to make a whole lot of sense. But if you believe that we have souls and we are bigger than what we see and humanity is wiser than what we're experiencing, we have these, he called them avatars, who come in and they share and they show the way. In India, that person was named Krishna. It was Buddha. It was Jesus. It was Abraham, and so many other wise gurus that have that same consciousness as Jesus and Buddha and Krishna, but they're doing it quietly so they don't become the famous people. But it's there. And that's what brings me so much hope. So he wrote in this and talking about Jesus and the power of love and the power of that consciousness that can come in, and people refer to it as Christ consciousness, which is very much outside just the religion of Christianity. It's a level of understanding, a level of being in the world. But what he wrote was Jesus' sacrifice was primarily to exemplify for all time the power of spiritual force over ignorance and brute force. I'm going to say this again, and I want us to think about that, okay? Whether whether you're a Christian or not, or there's a fly, just think about the human being, the man, Jesus, what he came, what he shared. His sacrifice was primarily to exemplify the power of spiritual force over ignorance and brute force. He showed that the power of love could conquer the Roman Empire, which with all its might could not suppress his philosophy. His reign has outlasted that of all warrior conquerors based on the divine edict, love your enemies. We have a human being that came into the world in a very, very violent time. But he came in with this consciousness of divine love, and he understood the power of that divine love. And we still talk about him 2,000 years later. And we still talk about Buddha 2,500 years later. And we still talk about and read the wisdom of Krishna 3,500 years later. Because that is what sustains. And so, when we are alive in this point in time, this point in history, and we are looking at what I kind of think of as some lower, unenlightened forces having a whole lot of power, it can get overwhelming, it can be really scary, and then we have to put it in perspective that we're here in this point in time, but there is something more powerful than hate and fear. And we are kind of, at least I'm only going to speak for myself, but emotionally I kind of like go up and down like this. Like I'm like, oh, love, oh, right? When you're dropping down into what feels really dark, like bombs flying in the Middle East and people with masks just disappearing people off the streets, that is dark. That is not good. But we had 30 million people, and there were people, that was just in the United States. There were people all over the world doing the same thing, showing up together, laughing together with these joyful signs, expressing who they are, who we want the world to be, and then leaving with the environment just as good as we came. That is true power. That is the power of love. That is the power of joy. That is the power of connection. And that power will outlast and outsustain what we're seeing in the world today. It's not all perfect. I am not saying that. But we can be in charge of our emotions. We can be aware, and we can be reminded that there are role models, there are avatars, there are people who we can look to who had it just as rough and still said, I'm going to let love conquer all. That's where I hope to be for the next few years, because it is a long haul. We need to catch our breath, and then we join the choir again. And so with that, why don't we use those voices to sing? Number 159 in your gray hymnal, This Is My Song. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go now in peace. Amen.